Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
Every now and then there'll be these online code puzzles, and developers get, well, myself included, get kind of excited about it. Like, ooh, this is fun. This is challenging. Um, and generally I'll do one of those, and then Aaron will be like, Joel, what? This other work isn't done. Why are you doing this? And I'm like, shut up,
Yeah, I'll be
Aaron.
like, why don't you do the task that we're 3 weeks behind on?
Yeah, I'm not 3 weeks behind, like a day behind.
4 weeks.
Anyways, so the reason I bring that up is because yesterday I was working a bug that was really thorny. And I thought, like, hey, this is actually like one of those code puzzles. And just kind of reframing it in my head that way made it more fun. So I thought for today's topic, we could kind of go through that bug and some of the things I did to try to understand it and ultimately solve it. And as always, maybe try to come away with some takeaways, like some principles when we all have bugs, right? Like, how do we triage them? How do we reproduce them? Where do we reproduce it? How do we get to the root of the matter?
So I think the first thing we've mentioned before is like, don't get too stuck or don't take too long on a bug. Like try to
Sure.
try to prioritize it and everything.
Yeah.
So I'll start out with the embarrassing part about this story, which was this was actually my bug. And so I ran into this issue, and I went down kind of the troubleshooting rabbit hole, and I said, well, I don't really need to fix this until later. And I know Joel has some time coming up for this project. So, and we talked about it, but I decided that like I could continue the project because I'm the main developer on it, and I have familiarity with all of it. And this we don't need familiarity with the project per se to solve this bug.
Right. Yeah.
So it was easier for me to say, well, I've spent a couple hours. I'm going to give it to Joel. So I think that the first core principle I'm trying to make here is, deciding, like, first of all, even when you have a bug, who is the best person, to solve it, or what makes the most sense.
Yeah.
And it's not saying like if you generate a bug, you should definitely not fix it, but it's after a while, like,
right.
If you tried to make some decision, tried to make some progress and you haven't, what's the next step? Well, am I the best person to solve this?
Yeah. And to cut you some slack, Aaron, this is an app that's not in production yet, right? So these aren't users encountering these bugs and we're like triaging it, but it's something we encountered in the course of development. I suppose I should say what it is. We've been kind of teasing this whole time, but the issue had to do with uploading a CSV file and using the Laravel file validation rules to say, hey, is this a CSV file? The MIME types rule. And like, you had it working, and then all of a sudden it wasn't working. And like, no matter what CSV file you uploaded, it would just say, this is not a CSV file. I forget the specific text of the error, but it was that MIME types error failing. We're like, what is happening? Why is this not working? And so I think when you were working on it, you had even thought, well, maybe this is just something about our Docker environment. We use Alpine Linux as the main image, and it's pretty stripped down, and maybe it's missing like the magic. What is it called? Magic or
yeah, magic mimes or whatever it is.
Yeah. And so that's kind of why we punted. And then it wasn't until later when we pushed it up to a staging environment and it happened again. It's like, oh no, this is actually a real bug we have to figure out. So the first thing I like to do is, of course, to reproduce the issue. And so this is kind of where I hit my first head scratcher, because on the page where you can upload the file, we provide a file template. So like, click this link, download a CSV file, put your data into it, and re-upload it, just to make it easy. And so if I downloaded the file and immediately re-uploaded it, it worked. It's like, great, thank you, all done. If I opened that file I'm on a Mac, and so by default, I think it opened in the Numbers app that you get from Apple. And if I resaved it as a CSV, I made no changes to the file, and I uploaded that, it didn't work. And I'm like, what is happening here? Come on. So then I thought, well, maybe Numbers is weird. I'll use Excel. I have an Office 365 subscription or whatever, so I have Excel on my machine. I did the same exercise. I opened the downloaded template. I resaved it from Excel to a CSV, no changes. Tried to upload it to our app. It's like, nope, that's not a CSV. And so I am kind of pulling my hair out at that point. Like, what's going on?
So before you continue on here, I know
Hmm.
we have some listeners that aren't programmers.
Okay.
And so if you're not a programmer and you work with programmers, yeah, there's things we can do to like not work. But also there's other things that are like we're like, no, we were trying to figure out how to do an upload and it took a whole day.
Yes.
This is an
Right.
example of why. Like
Right.
so far, you there's no clear reason why this is happening.
No, no, exactly. It's like the file is the same. So then I got a little smart. I'm like, you know what? I can take because this is actually a perfect situation. You have one thing that works and you have another thing that doesn't work. I don't know what the difference is between them, but having like a good test case and a bad test case is hugely helpful to debug an issue
Mhm.
like this. It's much worse to like it just doesn't work at all, and I can't figure out why.
So really, that's the second
Mhm.
thing that you want to cover here
Yeah,
making sure that you can kind of duplicate the error, but also it really helps if you can find a scenario where it's not a problem as well.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So having that in hand, I have a tool I like to use for comparing files called Beyond Compare. I like paying for stuff, Aaron, and it's a paid program. So,
Yeah.
but it has a mode. When I did the diff, it actually is smart enough to know, oh, these are CSV files, so it kind of compares them in a tabular format, and it's like, nope, they're the same. I'm like, no, they're not, because I could see on disk they were 1 byte difference file size. So I overrode its helpful, auto file detection. I said, no, just give me like a hex dump and compare it. Like I want to see the bytes by bytes. And well, sure enough, when I did that, I could see the file on the left that worked used Linux line endings, slash n or backslash n, and the file on the right was using Windows for some reason, backslash r backslash n combined. And I said, oh, there we go. That's the difference.
Hmm.
So I edited the file manually to backslash n, uploaded it, still didn't work. So
Still
I'm like,
didn't work.
still didn't work. I'm like, come on. And I think you and I were even pairing on this. And maybe you pointed out the another difference is the file on the left, the good file, had a trailing line ending. So at the end, so the CSV file was a header row and then 2 rows of data. But at the end of the second row of data, the last line in the file, it also had a line ending. And
Oh,
whereas
and the reason I noticed that is because right now we're using a package from PHP League called,
Mhm,
their CSV.
yep.
But before that, back in the day,
Mhm.
when you had to read this in with, fget CSV and stuff like that, the issue we'd run into a lot of times is there'd be that trailing line break. And so the last result you get in was just an empty row. So
Right.
I was familiar with like a lot of CSVs have a trailing line break.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of what made me notice. I'm like, well, yours doesn't.
No, yeah. And so that was the difference. The file on the right, the file not working, didn't have one. So then what did I do? I added a trailing line break, uploaded it, and it worked. And I'm like, oh, well, clearly this somehow needs a trailing line break in order to detect the file type. And that just spoiler, that was not the solution. Um, but I felt like we were moving kind of closer to it. So then I'm thinking, well, how do we fix this? So I dug into the validation rule, and I saw it was using the underlying Symfony uploaded file, which was using the Symfony mime composer package, which when I dug all the way into that was using PHP's native file info extension. And so seeing that whole traversal of things, my instinct was then, all right, well, I'm gonna take it out of this app. I think we've had an episode about this, and I went to PHP eval and I did like the smallest reproducible test case I could, not using Laravel, not using the Symfony Mime package, not using an uploaded CSV, but like raw text, write it to a temp file, and then have this file info extension tell me what is it. And sure enough, I was able to get one to come back text CSV, one to come back as text plain. And by playing around with it, what I realized was happening is the trailing line ending was kind of a red herring, but also it was sort of the solution because it needs to have 3 lines of data in order to detect it as CSV. So the trailing line, even though the
What
next
what
line, yeah,
what needs to have 3 lines?
the CSV file we're uploading,
No, no, I mean like what what piece of code requires that?
I didn't dig completely into it. I
Okay.
tried looking at like the PHP source, and it was calling out to another C library called libmagic, and I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm not going to figure that out. But that's ultimately what it's relying on. There's that magic file database which comes from libmagic. I was able to see PHP like patches it a little bit to make it work inside of PHP, but ultimately, the definitions for what is a JPEG, what is a PDF, what is a CSV, all come from that other libmagic library.
Okay,
So
so yeah, that's what I was trying to ask. Is like,
mm,
was it the Laravel code? Was it the Symfony packages? All those that are, or was
no,
it the F info
no,
module in PHP? Well, I mean,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, once you get to F info, I mean, then
right.
you really can't do anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not opening a patch somewhere. And honestly, it's probably not a bug. It's just maybe unexpected behavior on my part.
Mhm.
And in reality, like you'd hardly ever run into this, right? Like who's going to upload a bulk CSV file that has 2 rows? Like it
Right.
like you can, but in reality, this probably never would have hit a user. It was just the sample file we were using only had 2 rows, and these other tools don't do a trailing line, so it didn't hit that 3 line threshold. And it's like, oh, it must be just a plain text file.
Hmm.
So, anyways, after having done that, I felt like a programming master, but also felt really dumb at the same time.
Yeah, that's what programming should do to you.
Yes. So the last takeaway I have from this, maybe a principle to share, was when I was going through this, at a certain point, it was like I just wanted to know the answer. Like at a few points in the process, we had come up with workarounds. Like we could just do this, we could do that. But I really wanted to know. And so I time boxed it though. I said, you know what? If this
Mm.
isn't ready, if I don't have an answer by the end of the hour, I'm just going to use this workaround we talked about. And so that's another thing too, is like, don't take it personal. Maybe bookmark it and come back to it later when the task is done. But don't get so obsessed with finding something weird. If you have a valid workaround, sometimes that's an okay alternative.
Yeah, because the client wasn't going to pay us to continue their research into this. They just want the product done. And so at
Right.
some point, we have to balance that with the amount of time we're spending. So good point. Do you ever notice how there's an inverse relationship between how well you know someone and how much you clean your house before they come over?
First of all, that is a very programmer way to say it, but I, I I haven't thought about that, but I'm starting to now, and I think I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like the better you know someone, you're like, oh yeah, just come over or whatever. But if it's like a new friend or a brand new whatever, like you
Mhm.
tend to clean up stuff. But after you've known a person for a while, you're like, they'll just
Yeah.
accept me and all of my garbage on the table.
Hmm. Yeah, Aaron, it's sort of like when we do video calls, our first ones probably were very pristine backgrounds, and now you can see like a heaping pile of Amazon boxes behind me, and I just don't care anymore.
Have you ever ran into this problem? Or do you even validate your MIME types when you upload your files?
We have a whole book on the topic of validation, the different rules, and how to use them. Head to masteringlaravel.io and click on Validation Book.